Welcome to The Bridge. In this podcast, we explore how to walk out living in the tension of kingdom truths, kingdom principles, as well as bridging the gap between the truth and understanding. So you can actually have a truth, but without understanding, you don't know how to apply it. You don't know where it fits. And there's a lot of people out there that have tons of questions, and I'm sure even some of you do, on not only what is true, but how do we apply it? And so today, actually, I have a good friend of mine who's usually the man behind the camera, Charlie Moreno. Carlette we just finished this semester at Christ for the Nations, and so we've been very busy, and she's with the kids today, having a lot of fun. So I asked Charlie to join me today, and this is the second part 2 of a subject that's near and dear to coaching, the coaching world that I am smack dab in the middle of, and that is, what is a meaningful life? Is it the life of sacrifice, or is it the life of dreaming? Is it sacrifice or dreaming? And my answer to that, and of course, we just did part 1. If you're watching this and you didn't watch part 1, I encourage you to go backwards and watch part 1 directly following watching this. But we talked about a life of sacrifice, and we don't have to pick between the two. Sacrifice and dreaming are intended to be walked out simultaneously. So in episode 1, we went after sacrifice. We went after a life of surrender. That, to me, is what we would call the tethering or the foundation of which we live. And today we're going to talk about dreaming and the art of dreaming big and what are the steps of dreaming, because there is an essential part of living that requires us to dream. It does require us to dream. So I'm excited, Charlie. I'm excited that you're with me today, and we get to talk about life.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you just got done editing, I know, the sacrifice episode. Is there anything specific that stood out to you in that episode?
Yeah, because the church usually doesn't talk about those two things at the same time, as you mentioned. So it's always too much emphasis of the sacrifice, of the just sacrifice everything you have. And then sometimes they preach a lot about dreaming, about vision, about those things, but they never talk about both at the same time. And like you mentioned before in the previous podcast, it seems like they contradict to each other, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to your point, a lot of times we're pigeonholed into one side or the other. If you're not dreaming big enough, something's wrong with you. But then we don't even know how to define a big dream. A lot of us are being sold a big dream means, more money, more fame.
Yeah.
Let's just stick Jesus on the top of it. Live your big dream, but we don't understand it. And you're right. And I think there's a lot of confusion because of that. A lot of people are disillusioned, I believe, because they've been sold that to live for Christ means to dream big, but they don't gain understanding of what that dreaming big looks like.
Mm-hmm. It depends on the motivation. I think it's a lot to do with the heart. Yeah. Where is your heart behind it? I remember when I was in CFNI, there was a friend of mine that was actually focusing like, well, this about the number. Like we dream big numbers, like a multitude of people of numbers. And I was like, well, okay, but there's something kind of like, I don't know. And then you mentioned this, one of the points you mentioned last time is about sacrificial. What you think about those dreams have to do with sacrifice for others? Like think about others before yourself. That's something that my dad taught me, actually, that is always think about others before you're thinking about yourself.
Yeah.
That's priority, and that's pretty much what Jesus taught.
It is. And Jesus was the biggest dreamer ever in history, because he dreamed of saving the world, the entire world. And before the foundations of the earth, he predestined us to be sons. He dreamt of the day that we would become sons. But he taught us how to do that in this tension, because it says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. It required a sacrifice. So we know the value of something by what it costs. We discover the value by what it costs. And so Jesus walked this out beautifully for us, and I think there's so much we can learn from his life here on earth, and of course, where it led him to the ultimate sacrifice. But the ultimate sacrifice led to the fulfillment of his dream.
Yeah.
And I think if we begin to explore this today, and I'm going to just go through, I think reduce it to 3 points today. This is something that we do in coaching a lot. I was talking to Charlie earlier today, because in the coaching world, we go much more in depth in this process because it really is intricate. It's very personalized. What means something to one person doesn't mean something to somebody else, because God has designed each of us to carry something, part of who he is, and to demonstrate that to this world. And so it's not one size fits all, but there are principles that fit everyone. Biblical principles that I believe fit everyone, but how they get expressed is different in each person. And I think that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit today, the dreaming side.
Absolutely. I was telling Greg earlier that there's a gray area with Christians, kind of like between the world and between Christian principles, biblical principles. And it's kind of like a gray area where fame and success is measured based on numbers or based on of money, or based on achievements. And it's kind of like, well, it's for the kingdom of God, but there's like kind of this gray area. And then there's like, sometimes we don't know if it's a godly thing or it's just a selfish thing, it's a world thing. And then it's kind of like in between.
Yes. No, and I think even within coaching world, because we do a lot of that on the business side of things, but even within coaching world is there, and even within ministry world, there can be the temptation to overpromise. If you come to me, all your problems are going to be solved. When you're a pastor, when you're a leader, the temptation is to overpromise. It's to make yourself central to that other person's life, when in reality, none of us have the capacity to change somebody else from the inside.
Right.
Only God does.
Yeah.
So when we feel, because we're afraid of being unimportant, or we're afraid of missing out on something, then our dreams take on a life of their own to compensate and overcompensate for our sense of not being somebody important.
Yeah.
I'm not somebody important until I have a big dream. So I think in that, it's going to be fun to talk to you about this today and just go through some of these principles. And our hope for you is that this is just start the discussion, because getting into a community, getting into a tribe of people that you can continue to discuss what you were designed for, how to live a life with the foundation of your life being sacrifice, meaning you are other-centered. When that's the foundation, you walk through that process, dreaming looks radically different than it did before you wanted to sacrifice. And that's what we're going to go through today. So let's just hit the ground running, and we'll talk right through it. But number one, when you're dreaming in a healthy way, okay, that means you've started with that place of sacrifice, and you've understood what a healthy life of sacrifice, not self-martyrdom, by the way, self-sacrifice is. The first principle that I'd like to talk to you about today is dreams introduce us to ourselves. Now, this is an important point. A lot of people want to dream something big, and then when they accomplish in their mind, when I've accomplished the dream, I will finally be somebody. So in their mind, they're thinking the fulfillment of the dream is what's going to make them. So I want us to take a look at this just for a second, because that's the thing that leads to cynicism. It's a perpetual carrot, if you will, that's always 5 steps in front of you. If you fulfill this thing, you'll finally be somebody. And then you get that, but it's not quite enough. And there's a next dream, and the next dream, and the next dream. And pretty soon that leads to a sense of futility, which leads to cynicism. And so we're going to talk about cynicism in the next point. But right now I want to talk to you about this. Your dream, I want you to think through the life of Joseph in Joseph the Dreamer. I'm talking about in the book of Genesis. It's the son of Jacob. And he had these 2 dreams, and essentially both of these dreams, his brothers and his father and mother are bowing to him. And so in these dreams, he understands, I'm going to be important in the future. I'm a big person because this dream's proving it. But then he shares the dream, and adversity immediately comes by him sharing the dream, and he gets sold into slavery because of the dream. The dream led him into slavery and then into prison. We're shortening the story, but it led him the opposite direction of what he originally thought the dream was about. Because when he first had the dream, he thought he was important because of the dream, and the fulfillment of the dream would prove that he was important. No, the dream was actually there to lead him into a process to form him. And it wasn't the fulfillment of the dream that made him important. Yeah, ultimately, he goes to Egypt, and because he's in front of his brothers and his father, and slavery, and then in prison, and then he, through miraculously interpretation of dream, he becomes prime minister of Egypt. So he becomes somebody important in man's eyes, and he's able to save his father and his brothers because of that. So now they come in a famine into Egypt, and he forgives them. Now that process of him forgiving his brothers for selling him into slavery, him welcoming his father and his brothers into the land that he had been in, persecuted before he became somebody important in man's eyes, that whole process of slavery and imprisonment is what formed his character. It's what developed him. It's what caused him to grow in stature internally. It wasn't the position of being a prime minister that grew him. It was the position of slavery and imprisonment that grew him internally. And oftentimes we think that the dream becoming a reality, at that time we were finally prime minister, and all the prophecies that we've received about being somebody big and preaching in front of thousands, and we're going to do this. And we think, oh, when I finally see that become a reality, then I will be somebody. No, the dream is intended to invite you on a journey of being formed, and you're formed in the journey. You're not formed at the destination. So the greatest fruit you will have in your life is in the journey. As a matter of fact, I will say this, that most dreams, many dreams, maybe not most, I would say many dreams that God has given us are not fulfilled in one lifetime. So if you're not somebody until they're fulfilled, you'll never be somebody in this lifetime. But if you think generationally, and we'll talk about that in number 3, but when you're thinking generationally, you'll start to understand this. So I want you to understand, dream big, but your dreaming with God will show you what's possible, and it will introduce you to a pathway of being formed. It's not about the destination and waiting to exhale at the end because you're finally somebody. It's about being invited by a loving Father and a community to actually go towards something and believe that something's possible.
Many examples in the Bible, when somebody had a dream, they always thinking about themselves. And when the time ends, like, nobody cares about the next generation or the next generation. They're just thinking about, well, as long as it's fulfilling my lifetime, and as long as I'm okay, that's fine. Whatever happens to the next generation, I don't care. And you see that in the life of the kings a lot. Like, they prosper, they have dreams, they fulfill those dreams, and they care about their generation. They're fine, and then the next one,
they don't care about, and the next one's completely destroyed because they make stupid decisions because they knew that they weren't going to reap the consequences their children were.
Yeah. That's very sad.
Very sad, because their dream was centered around them.
Yeah.
How meaningless and futile it is, right? And I think oftentimes when we're sucked into that world of dreaming our big dream, and we think it's about us, man, then what are we doing? It's a spiral downhill. We're waiting for this magical moment that will finally be somebody. And the whole time, God is wanting to show us, you already are somebody, and I'm forming you into how I designed you. And the dream is intended to introduce you to who you already are and who you're becoming all at the same time.
And I contrast that with Jesus. Like, when Jesus is praying in John 17, he's like, I'm not only praying for them, but I'm praying for the ones who will believe because of them. So he was always thinking for the next ones to come. Like he was always mindful of what is going to come after them. So he was like thinking ahead of time in generations.
Very good. Yeah, John 17 is amazing. And in the fact that Jesus prays for us in John 17 and we get to eavesdrop on it and read it, we get to read the words that he prayed over us 2,000 years ago. And I think this is why the sacrifice side, when we talk about dreaming and you understand it, if you understand the sacrifice side, it will really tether you so that when you're dreaming, if you never leave sacrifice to dream, we don't graduate from sacrifice into no longer having to sacrifice. Actually, if you're going to mature in the kingdom, you graduate into understanding more depths of sacrifice and more depths of surrender. And that makes the dream so much more fun because you will have instant fulfillment internally when you're living for something greater than you. Greater than how you look, greater than how many followers, greater than the nonsense right now, right? I remember about 3 years ago, I'm reading the part about David counting his mighty men, not his mighty men, counting his soldiers. And after he got done counting all of them, there was a plague sent against Israel because it caused God to say, "What you're going to now count your soldiers to see how powerful you've become instead of trusting me." And I remember reading it, and God actually challenged me. He said, "Craig, I never want you to count how many people are following you. I do want you to count those that I've called you to disciple. Who have I brought into your life that you narrow your vision towards? Because I want you to be intentional about the few. Count the 12, not the masses." Yeah. And that set me free to go, oh, this dream really is about going small again. I want to see nations changed, but I want to have, so my dream is, I want to see nations changed by the love of God. I want to see nations adopted into the kingdom. I'm dreaming big with the courage to narrow my vision to 3 people, to 12 people. And if we can dream big with a narrow vision, something that Paul Miller says that the narrower your vision, the broader your soul, because love finds a landing spot. So your dream has to be narrow enough to find a landing spot with someone, not just generalities, to really be known. Number two, healthy dreams require wonder and innocence. Healthy dreams require wonder and innocence. This is something that stands in the way of people dreaming today is cynicism. The cynic, it's, again, I'm going to quote Paul Miller from A Loving Life and a Praying Life, an incredible author. But he said, the cynic is never fooled, so he is never delighted. Cynics have chosen that they're never going to be surprised by bad news again, so they never believe for anything that's possible. And I'm not saying this as somebody from the outside looking in. I'm saying this as somebody that for the last 3 or 4 years, God continues to highlight any place in my heart that I've become a cynic. Any place that I've been there and done that before. Why even try? And cynicism is the god of the age. It's actually people that are cynics are seen as wise. But in reality, they're just bystanders that are complaining but never entering the ring again. And God's challenging me, Craig, are you going to stay entering into the ring? Are you going to fight to stay innocent? Or are you going to become a cynic? Because dreams that are birthed out of cynicism are futile from the beginning. But dreams that come out of innocence and wonder, that means, God, you are this good. What's possible? Living in hope. And this is where, when we talked about sacrifice, when you live a life of sacrifice void of a dream, ultimately it leads to cynicism because life's just about you dying but you don't trust God to resurrect anything. And it's only about you earning everything, not discovering what he already earned through his sacrifice. Because really, dreaming is about entering into the fact he's already done the work. Now what's possible? So don't just live a life of sacrifice. You've got to dream, and you've got to be innocent in your dream and be in wonder in your dream. And when you can live in innocence and wonder and go, anything's possible. Yes, you can be fooled. But you can also be full of joy and full of hope, and you will see things happen in your life you never would have seen if you refused to dream and refused to hope.
Yeah, there is a lot of that going on, actually. This reminds me of a trend that was, I don't know, it's still there, but there was a trend in TikTok that a lot of teenagers that were saying, they were competing to see which one was suffered the most. There was a trend like that, like, well, I gone through this, so they even manufacture things like, oh, I suffer for this, I struggling with it, because it was like all into cynicism, as you say, like it was fueled with that a lot. And also reminds me somebody in Mexico, a worship leader, that he fell into nihilism because of that. Like he was very focused on success, that he went to the point, and now he's driven by nihilism, like everything is pessimism, everything is bad, everything is focusing on the bad side, like everything is gonna be bad. It gets to the point that he's like, well, God has already abandoned us, like he leave us alone already, so he got into that mindset already. And what leads him to that is what you're saying, like it's the cynicism that you talk about.
Yeah, it is something that by our bent can easily become, if we don't consistently fight to stay in hope and innocence, is to go into cynicism. Because cynicism promises control. What cynicism promises is you'll never be fooled again, so you can be in control of your life through cynicism. But it actually doesn't even give you control, because control is an illusion. You cannot control what happens to you. You cannot control what other people do. Matter of fact, even the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, not others' control.
Yeah.
You can walk in great authority in Christ, see signs and wonders, pray in the Spirit, and not control those close to you. You can't control your wife. You can't control your kids. You can't control what other people think about you. You can't control your finances. You can have dominion, but not control. You see, control is absolute. It's, I'm going to make things work. No, I'm sorry. That is not real. You cannot make your life work. So innocence is saying, I talk to people that a three-step process in the innocence. You want the innocence to dream and be real about what matters to you in your life. You need to be real, even if you've been waiting 30 years and you're tired of hoping, you need to hope a little bit more, just a little bit more. You need to have enough innocence to hope for what really matters to your heart, because God designed that piece. Now, once you acknowledge what really matters to you, the next step is not gaining control. The next step is acknowledging your inability to make it a reality. You have limitations. No matter how good you are, no matter how incredibly gifted you are, no matter how much money you have, you cannot make your dream a reality on your own. You are a piece of the pie, but not it in its entirety. So the step after acknowledging your desire and your dream is acknowledging your limitations, which is scary. How do you do both of those at the same time? It requires vulnerability. You got to say, I want this and I can't make it happen.
This reminds me of something that Wayne Myers used to say. When you have a dream, it is not bigger than you, that only God can make it happen. That's not a God dream.
That's right. And to your point, and Wayne Myers is an incredible father in the faith. Of those of you who don't know who he is, incredible father in the faith. If you don't need God to make your dream a reality, it's not a God dream. And I would bring it even one more step. If you don't need community and God, it's not a God dream. And that'll lead us to number 3 in a second. But that is, in essence, what leads us. When we say, I want this so bad, I would do anything to see this become a reality. And I can do my part, but not all the parts. That's scary. But that means you're living. You're showing up and saying, I could do my part, but I can't do all parts. I am at the mercy of God and other people to see it come a reality. Jesus saved the world at the cross and made himself at the mercy of the body of Christ to see it fulfilled. So who are we to think that we can accomplish this just by ourselves? But when you do that, what happens is it opens you up to a place of wonder. God, what's possible? What's possible in community? What's possible in reality? What's possible in my dream? And when you can stay in a place of wonder and innocence, then the healing from your past comes, from past disappointments, from past dreams that didn't come true. When you shut yourself off, become a cynic, and take control of your own life through your own strength, there's no room for healing. And your control needs to become more and more because life gets bigger and bigger. Your cynicism gets greater and greater. Your anxiety gets greater and greater. All it takes is one massive failure, and that's where suicidal thoughts come. That's where nihilism comes. It's this whole sense of like futility.
You can even get sick. Like
Yes.
I know some people that get to the extreme that it started to affect them physically. Like people get cancer, people get like physically ill
Yes.
because of that level of pessimism and so.
Absolutely. It becomes a armor, but the wrong kind of armor.
Yeah.
We become impenetrable to love. Love can't penetrate anymore. And we become the crotchety old person that we saw when we were young, thinking we don't want to become like that. We become that. And so I would encourage you, if that's you, all it takes is one decision. You have to let go of your right to make your life work in your own strength and to control everything around you. You have to give up your right to preserve yourself. Go back into living a life of sacrifice while you're dreaming about something you can't accomplish on your own. And as soon as you surrender that, in a moment, your joy can return to you. And it might be this much joy, but it'll grow the more you surrender.
The more you love others, you start. It reminds me of a quote from somebody that says, like, if you want to be happy, you have to make others happy. And also Pastor Robert Morris talk about that. Like, if you want something that you're lacking, like probably you start giving that to others. You know, like if you want to be happy, start making others happy.
That's right. We were born to invest into other people, and that's an incredible, a meaningful life in doing that. It's an incredibly meaningful life in it, and I think the privilege that we have to invest into other people at our lowest point can pull us out of belly button gazing. What am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? Come on, let's start focusing on others.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the book of the Christmas Carol.
Yeah,
the Scrooge. You see the story of Scrooge. Like he started like loving people, and little by little, year by year, started to get harder and harder to love. But it gets to the point that he was just only loving himself.
that's right.
But it didn't come overnight. It was slowly, gradually becoming that person that in the book you described. Like
With the adversity that comes that causes us to surrender more, like Joseph becoming the person that became a prime minister, right? I used to have these conversations with God of like, Galatians talks about this in chapter 4. that a son is treated the same as a slave when they're young. It uses two different words for son in that chapter. In English, it's just son. But it's an immature son when they're young is treated the same as a slave when they're little, until they reach an appointed time where they're ready to receive their inheritance. And I would struggle with God. I'm like, why are you withholding something from me until I prove who I am, like I'm earning it? Why are you withholding something from me? And then I'm walking not only through scripture and through prayer until he started showing me, Craig, I'm not withholding something from you for you to prove yourself and earn something from me. I'm withholding it from you to develop your internal world so that as you gain something in your external world, you can now actually steward it well. So the 2-year-old son wasn't receiving his inheritance of the entire estate because he would squander it. He received it after his internal world was developed enough to steward it. It was the wisdom of the father that held on to it until he was prepared for it. And so oftentimes the adversity of dreaming and us not getting our dream right away is because we're actually being developed internally to steward it. And that's the gift, because when your internal world is flowing properly, you're at rest. If you were to receive an incredible inheritance in this natural realm, whether it was lots of property or money or fame or whatever, you would receive all of that before your internal world was developed. It could destroy you, right? And that stuff actually doesn't make a meaningful life. So innocence is protected through the process of surrendering our dream back to God and letting him make it a reality and letting him bring it into our lives when we're actually ready to steward it, not acting like a toddler. I demand it right now. You better do this, God, or else.
I think that's why Jesus says, like, he's talking about the grain.
Yep.
Like, in order to produce fruits, have to bury it into the dirt and then die and then produce much fruit.
Spot on. It's the weight of the soil that cracks a seed open. And that's right. It takes some death before something gets resurrected. So number one is dreaming introduces you to yourself. Don't wait for the destination. Understand the process. Number two is healthy dreams require wonder and innocence. That means they require you to let go of cynicism and your right to be a cynic. Trust me, it's not helping you. I tried it. And number three is dreams are inherited, not earned. This is something that I've found is one of the scariest things that we talk about, and I talk about it in depth in some of my series, and that is inheritance itself. Because inheritance means that we're receiving something from somebody we didn't earn. And right now, people are terrified of the failures of their fathers, not just in natural fathers, but even spiritual fathers. They look and say, but look what they did here, and look at their mistake here, and look at their mistake there. I want nothing to do with them. I want to start brand new, start over, start from scratch. I'm starting with me. And because they think they're starting with them, it's going to be perfectly clean, and they feel like they're self-made. I'm going to be self-made. I'm going to make myself. I don't need anybody's help. Well, if you don't know how to be a son, then you won't know how to be a father. If you don't know how to receive something, you'll actually teach your children to be fatherless as well, because you'll tell them that your father's failures were so scary you want nothing to do with them. They're going to start believing that your failures are too big for them. They're not going to want anything to do with you. Now, this is a scary subject, and I get it, but I'm going to poke the bear a little bit because it's been something that I've had to work through, especially in the last 15 years when it comes to inheritance. You have to, if you're dreaming and the dream just starts with you, it never started with anybody else, and you think that you've never been influenced by anybody else, and you're just starting on your own, you're already fractured and you're already in cynicism. You've got to understand that dreams have been passed down. You are not the origin of the dream, first of all. God is the origin of dreams, and those that have been invested in you are part of your dream, whether you like it or not. And they're imperfect people, and you're going to have to learn how to wrestle through that. Dreams are inherited. They're not earned. They're birthed out of community, connection to God and to people. Genesis 1 talks about that. I don't have time to walk through that, but it's be fruitful. He blessed them, the two. And then he says, be fruitful. It takes two to be fruitful. Can't get pregnant by yourself. Be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, have dominion. Dreaming all comes out of connection to God and connection to people. And so how do you discover your dream? Part of that is it starts with knowing the story of those that have gone before you. Yeah, you have to start by understanding that it didn't start with you.
Yeah. And sadly, the tendency right now is to scratch the past, erase the past, and let's start brand new. Like they don't want, people also want to hear about what we came before us. Like there's a new thing, like the past is die. And even in the movies, they're showing that tendency, that trend.
And what it leads to is ultimately the next generation will do that to the ones that are doing it right now.
Yeah.
Because the cycle will just be, oh, well, that's how they handled it. We have to cut them off. The cutting off will continue because at the root of it is I'm self-made. I don't need anybody else's investment. And remember this, the enemy of our souls will do everything to disintegrate and detach us from any inheritance so that we feel completely alone, orphaned, and we've got to make life work on our own. If he can do that, if he can get you to believe that this is all about you making life work on your own, that it all starts with you, and cut you off from 2,000 years of church history of people walking this out in a really good way, and the faithfulness of the Holy Spirit to transform lives for the last 2,000 years. 6,000 years of God's faithfulness to man, starting with Adam and Eve, flowing to Noah, to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, all the way through to Jesus, and then birthing the church. When he can cut you off from God's faithfulness that is actually central to history, it's not a peripheral. God's faithfulness is the central subject of history, not man's failures. When he can cut you off from that reality, futility is right around the corner. It's only a matter of time because you will come to the end of your own strength to prove the world wrong, meaning it could come from courage. Everyone else has failed but me. I will do it right. Okay, Elijah. You will find yourself running from Jezebel, terrified, until you realize, I'm sorry, you're not alone. There's been many that have gone before you, imperfect just like you. There's a great cloud of witnesses that have gone before us. And we've inherited this thing.
I know even Moses got it right. Like it reminds me of the story of Moses. Like he tried to, he saw the Hebrews being exploited and he tried to jump in and like, I'm going to do it on my own. And he killed the Egyptian and he ended up running away until he was ready at recognizing like, oh, I had to depend on God in order to do this.
Yes. Ultimately, he depended on God. He depended on his brother and his sister, on his father-in-law for governmental understanding.
He changed totally.
He was broken in a good way. He came to grips with his inabilities and his limitations to the point that he didn't even think he was the right man for the job.
Yeah.
Right? He went from like, I got this to, you got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
He's like, God says, hey, I've called you. He said, I got a stutter. And then God doesn't even give him a pep talk. He doesn't even say, no, you got this, Moses. He simply says, I'm going with you. This isn't about you. he didn't give him a pep talk. You got this, Moses. You got the best gift mix. You got the best leadership abilities. God's response was simply, I'm going with you. And that's got to be so comforting to us. Do you realize that sometimes God is less concerned about your gift mix and your leadership abilities and more concerned about the fact he wants you in a community where he shows you you're not alone. I got those that are going to go with you. And by the way, I'm going with you. Because I've found that our greatest fear isn't dreaming big and that dream not becoming a reality. Our greatest fear is that dream not becoming a reality is attached to us being alone. Us making life work out on our own. Us not being valuable enough for that dream to become reality. The dream itself, okay, it actually is what it tells us about who we are, what we believe about who we are, and our place within community and our place in God's heart. So we're going to have to tackle this subject, inheritance. And if you're not willing to tackle it, trust me, you're going to go around this mountain many times. You're going to have to learn how to receive something you didn't pay for in its messiness. And there's a lot into that in inheritance. Jesus can redeem your inheritance, trust me. He can. Jesus' natural lineage, by the way, meaning his earthly fathers, you have Ruth that wasn't an Israelite. You have Rahab that was a prostitute.
Yeah.
You have Solomon. You have David that was a murderer and an adulterer. You have all the kings of Judah that were horrific. And then you get to Jesus and he never distanced himself from those people with fear of shame of their failures. Because he knew the cross would redeem all of it.
Yeah.
It didn't define him. And he still considered himself the son of David. So the cross is enough, is what I'm saying. And we can go through that theologically maybe sometime. But I want you to understand, don't be afraid of your inheritance. If you're going to dream well, here's the 3 again. Dreams introduce you to yourself, and the journey forms you. Don't wait for the destination or feel like you got to wait for it to become a reality. Matter of fact, if you're thinking generationally, that's not going to be an issue. Number 2, healthy dreams require wonder and innocence. That means that you want to push cynicism to the side and live with hope, great hope, in the midst of grieving. Live in the midst of sacrificing for somebody else, which means sometimes you'll sacrifice your dream for somebody else's dream. Live with great hope that God will do something with that. And then number 3, dreams are inherited, not earned, which means they're generational, which means that your dream might not happen for 2 generations after you. So if you're secure with the number 1, which means in the journey, you're being introduced to yourself and being formed in Christ and living a fulfilled life, even if the dream doesn't become a reality in your lifetime, you might be working on a 300-year dream, but you're fulfilled in your life because of who you are in Christ, not the fulfillment of the dream, which enables you to stay in innocence and wonder, which enables you to live generationally and live inheritance, receive it, and then give it away to your kids. There's one thing you want to give to your kids. Give to your kids innocence, wonder, and trusting God more than anything else. Yeah. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
We can go deeper into this. There's a lot of this. But I think what I get the most is just the basic principle is, where is your heart in the dream? Like, it's about you or it's about others? It's about God or it's about you? Like, what is the heart? When I went to this conference of filmmaking, one of the first conference, the first thing they talk about, it was that actually. It's like, you have a dream to do movies, you have a dream to do this and get into the media, but you're doing it for the money, you're doing it for the fame, or you're doing it for God and to reach the gospel to others, And where is your heart in this? If your heart is about you, about making money, about becoming famous, this is no place for it. Like, pretty much that's what's said. Yeah. So it's like, wow, okay.
It's profound. Anything we do, to your point, If it's just about us, how shallow?
Yeah.
How shallow?
And then in the end, you get depressed and you get frustrated because you didn't reach when you wanted to reach. And
yeah, and in right now in Western Christianity, whether it's through business or ministry, a lot of people are being sold on success.
Yeah.
And things that matter to the world, and just putting the stamp of the crucifix on the top and calling it Christian.
Yeah.
It's like putting lipstick on a pig and calling it something else. It's like, no, that is so futile. And it's a lot of people today that are cynics were simply naive optimists before. They believed that something would automatically become true because they believed in Jesus. My dreams are big, and they're going to be fulfilled, and I'm going to finally be somebody. And then it crashes, and they're chucking Jesus because of how he was represented to them.
wow. Yeah, I can think about ideas of like people that started in the church that became famous, and then you have people like Elvis that he started in the church worshiping God. He became so good, and he probably had this big dream, and it started to creep into the world, and then he ended up drugs and
yeah. So I encourage you, if you find yourself in the midst of dreaming or in the midst of cynicism where you're refusing to dream, or maybe you're somebody who's living a life of sacrifice, but you have stopped dreaming and you've simply found security in sacrifice without dreaming, that's going to lead to a lot of self-martyrdom. If you live a life of dreaming without sacrifice, that leads you to self-worship. So we don't want either of those ditches. I encourage you to dream big and live a life of sacrifice that tethers you to the ground, tethers you to reality, and meaning is your sacrifice. But dream big and hope that keeps you focused on the majesty of God, where your sacrifice doesn't become the thing you worship. Don't worship your sacrifice. Worship him. Live a life of sacrifice because he sacrificed for you. Get caught up in the majesty of what he's doing for you and give that to other people. And then dream big and live in this tension. And this will be a discussion that'll go on for centuries, because it has for centuries, right? For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. You have to have a joy. It's going to require a cross. So we bless you. We bless you with the capacity to say yes to what you were designed for, and to dream again. For those of you who have sensed cynicism in your own heart and you want to get rid of it, we bless you with the capacity to simply release it back to the Lord and say, God, soften my heart to believe for possibilities again. And for those of you who are really comfortable in dreaming but hate the thought of sacrifice, we bless you with the capacity to live a life of sacrifice and find joy in the sacrifice. Dream big, go small, watch nations transformed as you put the weight on God to do the transformation, and you focus on the 1, the 2, the 5 that he's called you to focus on and love well, and watch yourself learn how to receive love from others and from God as you get real about what's important to you in this life and real about your limitations to make it reality. We'll see you next time on The Bridge. Can't wait to continue this conversation. If you have any comments, put them below. We'd love to hear from you. And subscribe to the channel. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're all over the place right now. And thank you so much, Charlie, for joining me. Yeah. Bless you guys. We'll see you soon.